Ryan's spaceship shook violently as it crashed down onto the surface of a desolate planet. The control panel blinked red, and the loud screech of metal echoed in his ears. His hands tightened on the controls, but it was no use. He had lost control. The world outside his small window was nothing but chaos, a blur of stars and dust. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the ship came to a halt. Skidding across the rough ground, Ryan's heart pounded in his chest as the ship settled. It was quiet now, but the damage was done. Emergency lights flickered on, casting an eerie glow across the cabin. He looked out through the cracked window, seeing nothing but barren land. His ship was broken, and there was no way to repair it out here. But the wreckage wasn't his biggest problem. His oxygen supply was running low, and he had no idea where he was. His only choice was to find shelter, but the planet's surface seemed empty. There wasn't a single sign of life. Ryan grabbed his emergency pack, slipped into his survival suit, and opened the hatch. The outside air hit him like a cold slap, was dry and harsh, and he could feel the heat of the sun pressing down on him. With a sigh, he began to walk away from the wreck, searching for anything that might help him survive. As he trudged across the desolate land, his mind raced. What had happened to this planet? Why was it abandoned? Was there anyone here? His only answer came from the wind, which howled through the barren hills around him. The silence was deafening. After hours of walking, Ryan finally spotted something. In the distance, an old, crashed ship, half buried in the sand. It wasn't like his own ship. This one looked ancient. The metal was dented and rusted, as if it had been here for years, but it was a sign of civilization, and that was all that mattered to Ryan. He picked up his pace, eager to reach it. He approached. He noticed something strange. There was no sign of life around the ship. No movement, no footprints, nothing. It felt like he was walking into the ruins of a forgotten world. The entrance to the ship was blocked by a pile of rocks, but Ryan managed to squeeze through. Inside, the air was stale and heavy. The walls were covered in strange symbols he couldn't read. It was a place abandoned long ago, but there was a sense of sadness here, as if whoever had lived here had been forced to leave too soon. Ryan continued deeper into the ship, hoping to find something useful. His flashlight flickered as he turned it on, casting long shadows across the dark halls. He walked cautiously, not sure what he might find. It was eerily quiet. Suddenly he heard a soft sound, a faint rustle coming from a small room at the end of the corridor. His heart skipped a beat. Could someone be alive here? He approached slowly, peeking around the corner. There, lying on the floor, was an alien woman. Her skin was a pale blue, her eyes closed, and her body covered in wounds. She looked unconscious, barely breathing. Ryan's instincts kicked in. He rushed to her side, kneeling down. His heart raced as he checked her pulse. It was weak, but she was alive. Her injuries were bad but not fatal. She had been through something terrible, and it was clear that she had been hiding for a long time. "Hey," Ryan whispered softly, not wanting to startle her. "Are you okay?" Her eyes fluttered open, and she stared at him, her gaze filled with fear. She tensed, as if preparing to fight. But then, something changed. She relaxed slightly, though the fear never left her eyes. "You shouldn't be here, human," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You found me. Now you're in danger too." Ryan didn't know what to say. He had no idea who she was, or what kind of danger she was talking about. All he knew was that she needed help. "Don't worry," Ryan said, trying to reassure her. "I'm not here to hurt you, I just crashed." "I need help too." "My ship, your ship doesn't matter," she interrupted, her voice tight. "You're here, and that's enough for them to find you." Ryan frowned, confused. "Who will find me?" She didn't answer right away, her eyes scanning the shadows of the ship. It was as if she feared something was lurking, waiting to strike. After a moment, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can help you, but you need to trust me. You can't stay here. It's too dangerous." Ryan glanced around, still unsure of what was happening. But the woman's face was serious, her eyes filled with both fear and pain. He could see that she had been through a lot. If she was warning him, he had no choice but to listen. "I'm not going anywhere without you," Ryan said firmly. "Won't leave you here." Her gaze softened, though the fear never left her. "You don't know what you're asking. I'm not like you. I can heal, but I am not safe. I have no place left in this galaxy." Ryan shook his head. "It doesn't matter. I'm not going to leave you here alone." The alien woman seemed to hesitate, her expression torn. Then, slowly, she nodded. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll help you, but you need to be careful. They're always watching, and if they find us, it won't end well." Ryan nodded in return. He had no idea what he was getting himself into, but one thing was clear. This woman was the only chance he had for survival, and he wasn't going to abandon her. Ryan helped the alien woman sit up, carefully supporting her.
Ow.
She winced, but didn't say anything. Her wounds were still fresh, and her body seemed weak from the struggle she had endured. Despite that, there was a determination in her eyes, strength that Ryan couldn't ignore. "Are you sure you're okay?" Ryan asked, his voice gentle as he offered her a canteen of water. She took it slowly, her hands trembling slightly. She didn't seem to want to speak, but the silence between them grew uncomfortable. She finally looked at him, her blue skin glowing faintly in the dim light of the wrecked ship. "I'm fine," she said softly. "I've been through worse." Ryan wasn't convinced. The way she looked at him, with that mixture of fear and something else regret, maybe made him want to know more. But he knew better than to push her for answers. Whatever had happened to her, it was clear she wasn't ready to talk about it. "Who are you?" Ryan asked, instead trying a different approach. "What's your name?" The alien woman hesitated, her eyes flicking to the shadows as if something might be lurking there. She looked back at Ryan, her expression guarded. "You can call me Lyra," she said at last, her voice quieter than before. Ryan nodded, trying to make her feel at ease, but his mind was racing. Lyran, alien name, something unfamiliar and strange. It was impossible not to wonder what kind of people she came from and why she was here alone on this forsaken planet. "You?" Ryan asked softly, his voice full of concern. He knew the question was big, but he had to ask. Lyra flinched as if the question pained her. "I told you," she replied. "I'm not like you. Been hiding for a long time." Ryan didn't know what that meant, but he pressed on. "From who?" "From them," she whispered, her eyes darting nervously around the darkened room. "The people who want me dead. They've been hunting me for years." Ryan's stomach tightened. This wasn't just about a crash or some simple misunderstanding. There was something much bigger going on here, something dangerous. The people. "Who want you dead?" Ryan repeated, trying to make sense of her words. "Who are they?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she closed her eyes for a moment, as if collecting her thoughts. When she opened them again, there was a deep sadness in her gaze. "They're not human," she said softly. "They're the ones who destroyed my people, my entire race. They came to our world, wiped us out, and I was the last one left. At least that's what I thought." Ryan felt his heart race, the weight of her words sinking in. The last survivor of an alien race. He couldn't even imagine what that must have felt like. Losing everything, running for your life, with no place to call home. It was clear Lyra wasn't just hiding from her enemies. She was running from the ghosts of her past. "I'm sorry," Ryan said quietly. Not knowing what else to say, "I didn't know." "No." She gave him a small, sad smile. "No one does. I don't talk about it. No one would understand." Ryan sat down beside her, his eyes locked on her. "I'm trying to understand, but you've been alone for so long. You don't have to be alone anymore. I'll help you." She looked at him, a flicker of hope appearing in her eyes for a brief moment. Then, just as quickly, it faded. She shook her head. "You don't know what you're asking, human," she said, her voice steady but tinged with bitterness. "I'm dangerous. I don't want to hurt you." Ryan frowned, confused. "What do you mean by that? You're not dangerous?" Lyra looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. "I have the ability to heal," she said, her voice soft. "But it comes with a price. It drains me. And Sometimes when I heal others, it changes things. People get hurt. They become part of me, and I lose myself in the process. Ryan's eyes widened. That's why you didn't want to heal me earlier? She nodded. I didn't want to risk it. I've healed others before, people I've tried to help. Every time something goes wrong, it's like the more I give, the more I lose of myself. Ryan sat in silence for a moment, absorbing what she had just said. It didn't make sense, but it also made perfect sense. Lyra was more than just a survivor. She carried a Burdana gift that was also a curse. Then, why heal me? Ryan asked, his voice gentle. Because you're here, she whispered, and you didn't turn away when I needed help. Ryan took a deep breath, his mind whirling with 1,000 questions. But there was one thing he knew for sure. He couldn't leave her here, not after everything she had shared, not after everything she had been through. I'm not leaving, Ryan said, his voice firm. I won't leave you alone, not after everything. Lyra looked at him, her eyes softening. For a moment, Ryan saw the person beneath the fear and pain. She wasn't just some alien. She was a survivor, a person who had been forced to hide from the world for too long. Thank you, Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. But you don't understand. I'm not a person anymore. I'm a weapon. Ryan shook his head. No, you're not a weapon. You're just someone who's been through too much, but you're still a person. And I'm not leaving you behind. Days passed in silence between Ryan and Lyra. She spent most of her time resting, her body still healing from the wounds that had nearly taken her life. Ryan, on the other hand, was busy trying to make their shelter more comfortable, scavenging what he could from the wrecked ships. Couldn't repair his own ship, but at least he could make sure they had enough to survive for now. Despite her reluctance, Lyra allowed him to help. At first, she wouldn't speak much, keeping her distance. From him, her eyes often held a distant look, as if she was always aware of some danger just beyond their reach. Ryan could see that even when she wasn't speaking, there was a constant tension in her movements. She was always on guard. Ryan didn't mind the silence. He understood that she had been through a lot. The fear in her eyes told him more than words ever could. It wasn't just her injuries. It was the weight of everything she had lost. The thought of losing an entire race, of being the last of her kind, haunted him. He couldn't imagine what that kind of loneliness must feel like. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the broken landscape, Ryan sat down next to Lyra, who was staring out at the horizon. It's peaceful here, Ryan said quietly, his voice breaking the silence. Lyra didn't respond immediately, her eyes still locked on the distant sky. Finally, after a long pause, she spoke. Peaceful? I don't think I've ever known peace. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. Everything I've ever known is gone, and now I'm just waiting for the next attack. Ryan glanced at her, wondering how much longer she would keep pushing him away. She hadn't told him everything yet, but he could tell there was so much more to her story. She was the last of her kind, running from enemies who would stop at nothing to destroy her, and still, she hadn't broken. There was strength in her, hidden beneath the layers of pain and fear. You don't have to wait anymore, Ryan said softly, looking out at the same horizon she was watching. Don't have to be alone. Lyra turned to him then, her gaze searching his face as if trying to read him. You don't understand. No one understands. I'm not just running from my past, I'm running from myself. Ryan frowned, not quite understanding what she meant. What do you mean? She hesitated, as if the words were hard to say. I carry the memories of my people, the ones I couldn't save. When I heal, I feel their pain, their deaths. It becomes part of me. I am not just Lyra anymore. I'm everything they were, and it's too much. Ryan's heart ached as he listened to her. He had known that her abilities came with a cost, but hearing the weight of it made him realize just how deep her pain went. She wasn't just a survivor of a massacre. She was carrying the entire burden of her people, their memories, their grief. It wasn't just her life that had been shattered. It was the life of an entire race. I'm sorry, Ryan said quietly, his voice full of sympathy. I didn't know. Can't imagine what you're going through. Lyra's eyes softened, but there was still that sadness in them. No one can, she said simply. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the wind howling softly outside their shelter, the same wind that had been blowing across the barren planet for who knew how long. Ryan could feel the weight of her words pressing down on him, but he couldn't fix her pain. He couldn't bring back her people or change the past. But he could be here for her now. He could offer her something she hadn't had in a long time, someone who cared. Maybe you don't have to carry it all by yourself, Ryan said, his voice steady. I don't know what you're feeling, but I'm here. You don't have to go through this alone. Lyra looked at him, her expression unreadable. You don't know what you're asking, Ryan? My past. It's not something you can fix. It's not something you can even understand. It's too much for anyone. Ryan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words. He had no idea what it felt like to lose everything, to be the last of your kind. But he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't leave her, no matter how hard it got. I don't need to understand it, he said, his voice calm and firm. I just need to be here. You don't have to carry it alone anymore. I'll carry some of it with you. For a long moment, Lyra said nothing. She simply stared at him as if trying to decide whether to trust him. Finally, she looked away, her gaze turning back to the horizon. I don't know if I can believe that, she whispered. But, thank you. Don't know what I would have done without you. Ryan smiled softly, though he knew there was so much more to their journey ahead. He wasn't going to change her past. But maybe, just maybe, he could help her start a new chapter. As the days went by, their bond grew. It wasn't easy. Lyra's past was always there, hanging over her like a shadow, but she began to let Ryan in. Little by little, she shared more of herself, and though her words were often filled with pain, there was also a flicker of hope in her eyes. Ryan wasn't just helping her survive, he was helping her heal, in ways she hadn't believed possible. And Ryan, he was learning too. He was learning that sometimes survival wasn't just about staying alive, it was about learning to live again. And maybe, just maybe, together they could find a way to rebuild something worth living for. The days of peace were short-lived. Ryan and Lyra had grown used to the quiet, the simple routine of survival. Ryan kept busy, repairing what he could from the wrecked ships, while Lyra rested, and on the rare occasion, tried to heal herself. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give them both a sense of stability. A fleeting moment of normalcy in a world that had been anything but that peace was about to be shattered. One morning, as the two of them sat near the remnants of the crashed ships, a distant sound reached their ears low, rumbling and unfamiliar. Ryan stood up, his instincts alert. Lyra, who had been quietly watching the horizon, stiffened. Her eyes widened with fear, and her body tensed, as if she could feel something closing in on them. Do you hear that? Ryan asked, his voice calm, but filled with concern. Lyra didn't answer at first. Instead, she stood up and walked toward the edge of their shelter, her eyes scanning the vast emptiness. The wind picked up, carrying the sound of something heavy moving across the planet's surface. The noise grew louder, closer, and Ryan could feel his pulse quicken. Lyra, what's going on? Ryan asked, taking a step toward her. There. Here, she said quietly, almost to herself, the hunters. They found us. Ryan froze. The tension in the air was palpable. He had known that Lyra's enemies were out there somewhere, but he hadn't expected them to come so soon. Looked around, trying to get a sense of their surroundings. The planet was barren, with no real shelter to hide behind. If they were going to survive, they would have to fight back. You said they would find us eventually, Ryan said, trying to stay calm, but we don't have to run. We can fight. Lyra shook her head. It's not that simple. They're not just hunters, right? Trained to kill? Ryan's eyes narrowed. Then we need to prepare. We won't survive if we don't stand our ground. Lyra didn't argue, but her face betrayed a deep fear. She knew better than anyone what they were up against. She had seen her people fall to these hunters. She had felt the pain of losing everything she had ever known. And now it seemed the hunters were coming for her hand for Ryan. The noise grew louder still, and Ryan's hand instinctively reached for the small blaster at his side. He wasn't a soldier, but he had seen his fair share of battles. If they were going to fight, he needed to be ready. Lyra, on the other hand, seemed to retreat further into herself. Her fear was obvious, but there was something else. Something. Darker. She knew the price of fighting. "They'll keep coming," Lyra said, her voice shaking. "They'll never stop until they have me. And if they catch me, they'll use me to hunt down the rest of my people. I can't let that happen." Ryan stepped closer to her, his expression firm. "We won't let that happen. I'll protect you." She looked at him, her eyes softening for a moment. "Don't know what you're saying, Ryan. You don't understand the power they have." "I don't care about their power," he said, his voice steady. "I care about you." Lyra's eyes filled with pain, but she nodded. She knew Ryan wasn't going to give up. She had tried to push him away before, but now, with the hunters closing in, she had no choice but to accept his determination. "We're in this together, whether she liked it or not." The sound of engines filled the air as the hunters drew closer. Ryan felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He could hear the roar of ships in the distance, their engines echoing off. The rocky terrain. The hunters were here. "Get ready," Ryan said, his voice low. "We don't have much time." Lyra's hand moved to the small pouch at her waist, and she pulled out a small device, a communicator. She held it tightly, her fingers trembling. "They won't stop, Ryan. Even if we fight them off, they'll come back. They always do." Ryan glanced at her, his face hardening. "Then we'll keep fighting. We'll make them understand that we won't back down." Lyra's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't respond, but Ryan could see the conflict. In her eyes, she didn't want to fight. She didn't want to risk any more lives. But she had no choice. The hunters wouldn't stop until they had her. If they found her, they would destroy everything she had ever cared about. Ryan moved, quickly setting up a makeshift defense around their shelter. He had no real weapons, but he was resourceful. He used what he had, stacking debris and broken ship parts to create a barricade. It wouldn't hold up forever, but it would give them some time. As he worked, he could hear the sound of footsteps, getting closer. The hunters were almost here. "Lyra, stay behind me," he ordered, his voice firm. She nodded, stepping back into the shadows as he finished setting up the barricade. He took a deep breath, his hand tightening around his blaster. The hunters were close. He could hear their voices now, all menacing. They were speaking a language he didn't understand, but their tone was unmistakable. They were looking for someone. Ryan's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know how this would end, but he knew one thing: he wasn't going to let them take Lyra. He wasn't going to let anyone take her again. The first of the hunters appeared on the horizon, silhouette against the dusty sky. Time. Ryan raised his blaster, his grip steady, and prepared for the fight that would determine their fate. The first hunter stepped into the clearing, his heavy boots crunching against the cracked ground. Ryan's grip tightened on his blaster, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea how many of them there were, but he knew that this single hunter wasn't alone. They always traveled in groups. "Stay back, Lyra," Ryan whispered, though he knew she wouldn't listen. She had already positioned herself behind the makeshift barricade, her eyes watching the approaching hunter. Her body was tense, ready for whatever was to come. Ryan's breath was steady as he kept his blaster aimed, his eyes trained on the approaching figure. The hunter's movements were deliberate, scanning the area for signs of life. His armor gleamed under the harsh sunlight, and his eyes were hidden behind a reflective visor. Ryan could tell from the way the hunter moved, confident and methodical, that this wasn't going to be easy. "I can't just stand here," Lyra muttered under her breath, her voice tight with the familiar fear Ryan had seen in her before. "I have to do something." Ryan shot her a glance. "Wait, don't make a move unless you have to." The hunter paused, his head tilting as if sensing something out of place. For a moment, Ryan's heart stopped. Had they already been discovered? But the hunter seemed to shrug it off, continuing his slow march forward. He didn't seem to be aware of their position yet. Lyra's breath hitched. Ryan could see the tension building inside her. She wasn't just afraid for herself, was terrified of what would happen if they were found. Her powers, the ones that had kept her alive this long, came with consequences. The more she used them, the more she risked losing herself. She had already given up so much, she couldn't afford to lose more. The hunter stopped, just outside the range of their barricade. Ryan could see his hands move slightly, adjusting the weapon at his side. His intentions were clear. He was preparing to search the area. Ryan's heart raced, and for the briefest moment, he thought about rushing out there, taking a shot before the hunter could react. Well, they were outnumbered, and rushing in would only make things worse. Had to stay patient. He had to trust that they could make it through this together. Lyra, however, seemed to be losing patience. She moved slightly, as if preparing to act. Ryan's eyes snapped to her, silently pleading for her to wait. But Lyra wasn't listening. In an instant, she raised her hand, and the air around them seemed to shimmer. A soft glow emanated from her body, and for a split second, Ryan saw a flash of power in her eyes. She was using her healing abilities, no doubt to mask their presence. The power surged, and the air grew thick with energy. The hunter's helmet turned, his head snapping toward their position. He had felt it too. "Damn it," Ryan muttered under his breath. The hunter charged forward, his weapon aimed directly. At their shelter, Lyra's face paled as the power drained from her, but she stood her ground. Ryan's mind raced. He had no time to think. It was now or never. "Get down," Ryan shouted. He fired a shot, aiming for the hunter's legs. Blast hit its mark, knocking the hunter off balance. He fell to the ground with a heavy thud, but the blast wasn't enough to take him out. The hunter scrambled to his feet, quickly regaining his position and returning fire. Ryan dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the shot. Lyra, still recovering from using her power, staggered but didn't fall. Her body trembled with the effort, and Ryan could see the strain in her eyes. He knew what this was costing her. She wasn't just fighting for her survival, she was fighting against everything inside her that wanted to give up. "Get inside," Ryan yelled at her. Lyra hesitated for a moment, but then, with a determined look in her eyes, she nodded and sprinted for cover. Ryan kept his blaster raised, watching as the other hunters began to emerge from the distance, their armored figures becoming visible against the horizon. He knew there was no way they were going to be able to fight them all off, not with just the two of them. There were too many of them. But Ryan wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not when Lyra was depending on him. "Ryan." Lyra called out from behind the barricade. "I need to get out of here now." Ryan looked over his shoulder. He could see the desperation in her eyes, the fear of being captured. But there was something else there, to something deeper. Lyra was more than just a survivor. She was a fighter. She was willing to risk everything to stay free. "I'm not leaving without you," Ryan said firmly. He wasn't going to leave her behind. He turned his attention back to the approaching hunters. They were closing in. The leader of the group was now in the front, his weapon aimed at Ryan's position. It was only a matter of time before they started firing in full force. Ryan's mind raced. He needed a plan. He couldn't fight them all off, not alone. But he could make them think he had reinforcements. He glanced around the wreckage, looking for anything that might give him an advantage. And then he saw at the old ship's engine. "Lyra," Ryan said urgently. "Cover me." Out. Waiting for a response, he sprinted toward the engine, hoping she understood what he was about to do. He grabbed a few pieces of scrap metal and placed them in front of the engine, setting them up as if they were part of an ambush. It was a desperate move, but it was all he had. As he worked quickly, the hunters moved in closer. Ryan could hear them speaking among themselves, their voices low, but filled with the certainty of victory. Ryan wasn't going to let them win. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the barren landscape as Ryan crouched behind the wrecked ship's engine, his fingers gripping the makeshift weapon he had cobbled together. The hunters were getting closer, and he could feel the tension in the air. Lyra's breathing was shallow as she crouched beside him, her eyes scanning the distance. She was still recovering from the earlier burst of power, but Ryan knew that there was no time to waste. They needed to act, and they needed to act fast. "Ryan," Lyra whispered, her voice strained but urgent. "We can't fight them all off." 8. Are too many? Ryan nodded, his mind racing. The situation was more dangerous than he had thought. The hunters weren't just skilled soldiers, they were relentless, and there was no telling how many more were out there. They were trained to track and capture, and it seemed like they had found their prey. But Ryan wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not when they had come this far. "We don't have to fight them all," Ryan said, his voice calm but determined. "We just need to create a distraction and get out of here." Lyra glanced at him, her eyes filled with both fear and a spark of hope. She had been running for so long, hiding from the galaxy's cruelty, that she had almost forgotten what it was like to fight for something. But now, with Ryan by her side, it was different. She had someone who cared, someone who wasn't willing to leave her behind. Ryan tightened his grip on the weapon he had made from scrap metal and parts of the ship's engine. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. He had rigged it to create a loud noise, something that would distract the hunters and give them a chance to escape. It was a gamble, but it was the best shot they had. "Ready?" Ryan asked, turning. To Lyra, she nodded, though her expression was conflicted. "As ready as I'll ever be." Ryan gave her a reassuring smile before standing up, holding the weapon in front of him. The hunters were only a few hundred yards away now, their dark forms moving steadily in his direction. It was time. He threw the makeshift weapon in the direction of the hunters' camp, where he had seen a small group of them gathering. The noise it made was deafening, metal clanging against rocks, followed by a loud explosion. The hunters paused, their attention momentarily drawn to the source of the sound. "Now," Ryan shouted. He grabbed Lyra's hand and pulled her toward. The gap in the wreckage where they had planned their escape route was a narrow path hidden among the debris, and it would lead them to a small cliffside where they could make a quick descent to the other side of the planet's rocky hills. The hunters hadn't noticed it yet. But that wouldn't last long. Lyra followed closely behind, her legs weak, but moving as fast as she could. She could hear the hunters shouting orders behind them, their voices rising in anger as they realized they had been tricked. The noise had worked. The distraction had bought them some time, but they were still being hunted. Ryan led Lyra through the narrow path, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that they didn't have much time. The hunters would recover quickly, and once they realized where Ryan and Lyra had gone, they would be on their tail in no time. The only chance they had was to reach the other side of the cliffs and find shelter in the caves there. It was a long shot, but it was their only shot. As they reached the edge of the cliff, Ryan glanced back, hearing the sound of footsteps growing. Louder. They were getting closer. Without hesitation, he grabbed Lyra's hand and led her over the edge, sliding down the rocky slope. The ground beneath them was loose, and they both scrambled to keep their footing as they descended. The sound of pursuit was growing closer. The hunters were relentless, and Ryan could hear them shouting to each other, trying to figure out where they had gone. Ryan didn't dare look back. They needed to focus on getting to the caves, where they could hide and regroup. They reached the bottom of the slope, breathless, but still moving. Ryan's mind was focused on one thing: getting Lyra to safety. He could feel her hand shaking in his, but she was still moving, still determined to survive. The entrance to the caves was just ahead, hidden behind a rock formation. They reached it in record time, their steps echoing in the narrow space as they ducked inside. The cave was cool, and the darkness was a welcome relief from the harsh sunlight outside. Ryan's eyes adjusted to the dim light, and he pulled Lyra deeper into the cave, away from the entrance. They both collapsed onto the rocky floor, panting and exhausted. Ryan could hear Lyra's shallow breaths, and he knew that she had pushed herself too hard. Her power had taken a toll on her, and she needed rest. "We made it," Ryan said quietly, his voice filled with relief. "We're safe for now." Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and exhaustion. "For now," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Oh, but I don't know how much longer we can keep running." Ryan took a deep breath and sat beside her, his mind racing. He didn't have all the answers. He didn't know how they would survive this fight, how they would escape the hunters who were still searching for them. But there was one thing he knew for sure. He wasn't going to give up on her. He wasn't going to let her fight this battle alone. "We'll find a way," Ryan said, his voice steady. "I promise." For the first time in what felt like forever, Lyra allowed herself to rest, to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. Maybe together, they could face whatever came next. And maybe, just maybe, they could survive this.